The head of the United Nations mission in South Sudan, David Shearer, says thousands of civilians would not be alive today if not for UN mission in South Sudan. He says now more than ever, 12,000 UN blue helmets and 2,000 UN police officers are vital to protect civilians. 60,000 people have fled from South Sudan's Equatorias to Uganda since the beginning of the year. Shearer noted that since July last year, the security, economic and humanitarian situation has worsened markedly and that virtually no part of the country is immune from conflict. He says a political solution is the only way forward in South Sudan. Now, joining me in the studio for more perspective on the political situation in South Sudan is Brian Adeba, the Associate Director of Policy at Enough Project. Brian, welcome to Africa 54.
Well, thank you.
Now, you know, Brian, last week there was a special session on South Sudan. Specifically, the U.S. ambassador to the UN was very vocal about how patient the international community has been with the leadership of Salva Kiir. It looks like it's time to go. Give us more perspective into this, given that today peacekeepers have arrived in South Sudan with a bolstered mandate to take care of the situation.
So let me address the U.S. ambassador's comments. First of all, it is the very first time that a member of the Trump administration has spoken out so strongly on South Sudan. Secondly, the other significant takeaway from that speech was her criticism of her counterparts at the Security Council for inaction on South Sudan. So going forward, she had also asked the question of when are we going to stand, how long should we stand aside and watch the carnage continue in South Sudan? Also, this speech was significant because it was also the very first time that the Trump administration, a member of the Trump administration, has called out the president of South Sudan for the president of South Sudan and the political leadership across the board in South Sudan for the carnage that is happening in the country at the moment. So that's important. With regard to the arrival of the protection force, it's going to face the same problems that have affected the UN mission in South Sudan. One, logistical issues. How are the logistics arranged around this force? Secondly, the status of force agreement between the protection force and the government of South Sudan. Previously, we've seen that that agreement hindered the amount of weapons that the UN can have and limited its capacity to confront the warring parties in South Sudan who are actually better armed than the UN force. So these are the compounding factors that will affect this force. But most importantly, the political endgame to this. The arrival of the force itself is commendable, but what is the political solution? Without a political strategy, I think then that the capacity of this force to actually contribute to peace in the country is going to be in doubt or questionable or unsure.
But when you talk about a political solution, where is this supposed to come from? Between Salva Kiir and his opponent, between the regional, leaders who have been trying to mediate the peace talks there, which apparently appear to have failed anyway? Or where do you expect this to come from? How effective will even these new peacekeepers be?
Yeah, I mean, like the region itself, the IGAD region and the African Union has a role to play in this, and using their clout, they could get the warring parties in South Sudan to come back to the negotiating table. This is not happening right now. Instead, what we've seen is with the gradual shoving or pushing away of one of the key protagonists in the conflict, and that is Riek Machar. And I think in the long term, there needs to be an evaluation on whether that strategy is actually working, because as we've seen, the conflict has proliferated in his absence. So he is still crucial to these talks, and there's a need to bring both sides to the table and start negotiations again.
Critics have been very quick to point at the role of the African Union because they've been calling for an end to the fighting. But what really has the African Union done to really quell this fighting and bring an end to the suffering of South Sudanese people?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And in the absence of any coercive measures to get the warring parties back to the negotiating table, it's not going to happen. And so if we look into targeted sanctions, an arms embargo on the warring parties. Some measures have to be taken to compel these people to come back to the table.
Now, you know, the Horn of Africa and East Africa is ravaged right now by the drought and famine. And even South Sudan has not been spared. But critics also say the situation in South Sudan is man-made. South Sudan used to be a breadbasket for the region.
That's absolutely true. I mean, the conflict, the famine itself is a result of the conflict. It's a result of the failure to arrive at a peaceful solution. And so that needs to be taken into perspective. While it is good to feed the population, the international community must also devise a political strategy to end it. Otherwise, the cycle will continue.
And so where is the leader of the opposition, Riek Machar, in all this?
Well, he's been pushed to the side. He's in South Africa. And as you heard from David Shearer, the region doesn't want him. But the region really needs to reevaluate this policy. Is it working or is it not working? Because we've seen that since his exile was imposed, there has been a proliferation of armed groups. The war has intensified. A lot of these groups that have come up have pledged loyalty to him. There's actually no signs that anyone is breaking away from him. On the contrary, his support base seems to be growing. So this factor needs to be put on the table and evaluated critically.
Now, I know you are a policy director at the Enough Project, but again, you are a South Sudanese native. What do you hear from the South Sudanese back home? What do they see as the solution? Because this is a country that the whole of Africa looked forward to being independent from Sudan. And there was so much hope, but none of that has happened from the word go.
Well, there's a need for, what I'm hearing is there's need for a national dialogue to get all parties or quarters of the country talking again. But for that national dialogue to happen, there needs to be a conducive atmosphere for it. First of all, you need a ceasefire, a genuine ceasefire, a comprehensive one. Then you need a conducive atmosphere to get the people together. Now, as envisaged, there's a national dialogue process ongoing at the moment. As envisaged at the moment, it is counterproductive to creating that kind of atmosphere that will bring everybody together. That is because, one, it is not inclusive. The reconstitution that has happened still falls short of so many factors and leaves the whole process unanswered. For instance, in terms of a venue, where is it going to be held? Who's going to participate? Are the rebel groups going to participate or not? And the absence of a ceasefire actually still casts a lot of doubt on the process.
And the two leaders, Riek Machar and Salva Kiir, have also created that atmosphere where people look at each other from an ethnic point of view. There's ethnic hatred, there's ethnic divisions, like we've seen in other countries, but this has escalated. How do you bring these people together?
Look, ethnicity per se is not really a problem in South Sudan. Ethnicity is a reflection of the failure of systems, of accountability, of equity. So as long as these systems are not existing, then we will see this manifestation of ethnicity and the ethnic differences that are proliferating. So we need, again, a conducive atmosphere where South Sudanese can talk about these differences. We need the existence of systems that are effective, that can mitigate these differences. At the moment, these do not exist. Since the SPLM government came to power, it has not concentrated on strengthening institutions. Rather, it has concentrated on hijacking these institutions for the personal benefit of the elite in power.
Brian, as always, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brian Adeba is a South Sudan political analyst and associate director of policy at Enough Project.